Welcome to Bloomberg Invest.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. This is so crazy.
I'm such a big fan, so I've got so many questions. In that bit that we played, you talked about by dint of who you are, and who you are is a native Californian. You're a musical theater major. You graduated from Carnegie Mellon. Industry was your first big show, big breakout role. Can you tell us a little bit about what attracted you to this show and to this character?
Yeah, I mean, so much. First and foremost, the writing. Our writers, Mickey Down and Conrad K, were both in the industry, and so what they brought to this show, aside from the drama, was like excellent real-world, like reality. I had never felt like I had seen the finance industry from the perspective of young people, and how I was able to connect with a world that I literally knew nothing about, aside from like Wolf of Wall Street, which is just a movie.
But you did do some research by watching some movies.
I had seen a few, but I had never seen any from the perspective of the newest or the youngest, maybe the hungriest people in the business. And as a young actor starting out in my career, I really identified with this like deep, hungry need to impress, to succeed, to gain some kind of notoriety in my industry. I really understood what that felt like, this sort of like clawing to the top. And my character, Harper, sort of does it by a any means necessary sort of vibe. That's not really my go-to. I'd rather kill him with kindness, but I understood it. I respected it. I also didn't know that the world of finance had any people of color in it. Like based off of the media that I'd seen, like Wolf of Wall Street or whatever, I felt like it was mostly the richest, the oldest, the whitest men. I didn't understand that everyone else exists. I look in the audience now and I'm like, you know what I mean? So that was really refreshing and really exciting to me, that I got to bring my experience as a young Black American woman into this world, because we existed there and I had no idea.
Do you remember what the description of Harper was on the page when you got the role versus what she eventually became? Yeah. I'm curious to see how much of you or your experience is reflected in the character.
Yeah, I think the biggest difference between the Harper we all know now and the Harper that I first met on the page is that she was very outwardly nervous. Like there was a lot of like, clammy hands and darting eyes. She was nervous. She was overcome by her anxiety in the situation. And I just thought, in what world is this young Black woman gonna step into this room full of people that she needs to impress while she's holding a massive secret? Like, I would never let them see me sweat. I just wouldn't. That's the training that I have had. You come into a room, you're like, this is where I'm supposed to be. You need me, and that's the end of it. You have to impress people. So I just decided that she's gonna walk in with confidence, and beneath that veneer, in her alone moments, in the moments when it becomes too much, you will see her sort of crack and crumble, and then we see the anxiety, instead of it being on display from the get, because obviously she's gonna be anxious.
Right. There's a lot underneath, but it's still waters on top.
Right.
There's a lot of furious paddling under the water.
Absolutely.
To mix my metaphors here. You mentioned Mickey Down and Conrad K actually worked on the trading floors in London, so they brought in that real-world experience. They did invite you to fill out the character, didn't they? I'm curious what they said to you and how you filled that role out.
I mean, really, they were like, for me specifically, they're like, we're not a 20-something Black American woman. So bring your experience in that way, which a big one was that sort of never let them see you sweat.
Had her natural poise.
Yeah, absolutely. That was something that I was like, my instinct brings me here when I'm trying to impress people. And then on a really basic level, they were like, we're British and you're not. So if there's something in the writing, in something that Harper says that sounds very British, you can say it in a way that is not that's American. So that was mostly what I brought.
The construct is very, very specific. I mean, we meet Harper as one of several junior analysts on the trading floor. She's an American expat in London. She's young, she's Black. What was your impression of this world prior to your joining the show? You mentioned that you didn't know that finance had people of color, but I did the math, and it wasn't difficult math for me. You were 12 or 13 during the financial crisis in 2008. So did that leave you with any impressions of what the finance world was about or what kind of impact it had on people's lives?
I mean, I was young, so not really, but I will just reiterate, like, what I knew as a sort of lay person to people in the finance industry was that there was, like, a lot of people in suits, like, in their tennis shoes on their way to work in Manhattan, and then putting on their nice shoes and changing their, like, dirty shirt from the outside to the clean one once they got inside, and then there was a lot of, like, sort of yelling, and then some of this, and then they had a lot of money. And that was pretty much it.
How accurate is that?
Is that right? Did I get that right? Do you change your shirt still when you get to the office? No. I see you say no, I don't do that anymore. Okay, maybe just in the 80s.
You mentioned that you mentioned Wolf of Wall Street. Did you watch any movies to kind of get a better understanding of how Hollywood depicted, banks and Wall Street, and kind of contrast that with what the showrunners intended to do with industry?
Sure, yeah, I didn't, for the very reason that, like, this show was not that. I didn't necessarily need a contrast because I understood it right away on the page, just because of the perspective this show is coming from. Again, most of the other movies were like the oldest, most wealthy people who had been in forever, and that was not what I was doing, so I didn't need that as a sort of contrast. I really just pulled from my own experience of being like a starving New York wannabe actor, and tried to fill this. It's kind of the same, except the only difference is that, like, Harper's dealing with, like, bazillions of dollars, and I was never dealing with that kind of money. So it just raises the stakes, but it's that same thing of, like, the relationships that you make with the people on the floor, the people who are coming in your class, and then juxtaposed with, like, your boss and that weird hierarchy. How do you impress, but how do you stay in your lane? Or, I really just went for the emotional side because the finance still escapes me. It really does. And I'm not going to cap about that. I'm not going to lie and say I do my own investing and I know. Nope, that's not for me. I'm just an actor. I'm going to leave that to you guys.
How difficult was it to master the jargon? Because there are scenes where it's just back and forth and it's rapid fire and there's numbers flying all over the place and one wrong word and someone does something different and billions of dollars are at stake. What was your process for that?
Yeah, one wrong word and they called cut. Yeah, the jargon was one of probably the most difficult thing to do because the emotion, anybody can relate to an emotional feeling, but the words, the actual words were hard because they're not familiar to us.
Yeah.
So once I understood that I was never going to really grasp what I was saying, I just went for straight memorization, just like drilling over and over. If I have a sort of big section in season 1 and in season 2, there's a couple really big trades that Harper does that requires a lot of exactness in the words, and she's talking to multiple people. So I would just write them down and like write them again and write them again and write them again. When you get in trouble when you're in school and you're little and they make you write like, I will not throw bubblegum in class. I will not. Like it was exactly that, but with all of the
Bart Simpson writing on the board, right?
Yeah, it was very that. So it's mostly just that, mostly repetition, and then you just kind of have to force the words out of your mouth because they're so unfamiliar to us. Oh, to me. I won't speak for the rest of the cast.
Did you visit any trading floors or any banks in New York or London to get a sense of what the feeling, the buzz was like in a trading floor environment?
Yeah, so in the first season, we didn't get to go, but we did have a sort of Zoom meeting with a person at Bloomberg who sort of ran us through how the terminals like
Do you remember any
work.
functions?
No. No. On our show, they are not functioning terminals. They're actually just screenshots, maybe from some of you, that just rotate every 45 seconds, I think. But I remember watching this, and this woman was saying, and this and this and this, and this is what this means. And of course, in my mind, it was like static. I just didn't understand it. But what I did observe in the back of her screen was there was, terminals everywhere and people working, and then someone would get up and have a conversation here, and another person would get and pass papers here. And I was like, the floor is so alive the whole time. But this person was just like laser focused and doing all these things, and their mind was going a million miles an hour. So that's the thing that I took. I was like, Harper's going to be that laser focused, like she's so smart, things are happening all the time while this sort of chaos is happening around her. So I just tried to emulate that. And in season 2, we filmed in the London Bloomberg building.
Yes. Although it was
great.
supposed to be the Pier Point, New York headquarters in the show, right?
Yes, in the show, yeah. We used your building because it was the best one. No, I loved being in that building, though. You guys have the best snacks. Oh my gosh, what a gift.
Well, we are very grateful for the free advertising as well. What do you think resonated with fans, particularly in season 2, which was much more plot-driven than season 1, which was really about introducing Harper and her colleagues, especially the junior analysts?
Yeah. Everyone can relate to relationships, and I think most people love drama. So I think the thing that really captivated in season 2 is that because it was more plot-driven, because it was more character-driven, that people could relate in some way. Either they saw themselves, or they saw someone that they knew, or they were just there for the gags, the dramas, you know, who knows. But season 1 was cool because it sort of opened up this world, this your world, our world, and set it up in a way that we could go to more interpersonal, more familial relationships. And what I particularly liked about season 2, as we open up these characters and learn about their families and relationships, it informs the way they are at work. And I think, for me, it gave me a lot more sympathy, empathy for these people who I didn't know very well. And it helps me understand your world and appreciate it more instead of being like, they have so much money. You know what I mean? Because people don't know. They don't know what you do. They don't know what you go through. And I was like, damn, if I had to do that every day.
So kind of an understanding of the stress and the anxiety that the day-to-day trading would really require or elicit in you.
Yeah, and particularly the youngest people who dream about this job or this world, and they're so hungry, and they'll do almost anything, you know, to stake their claim here. I was like, yeah, respect. I get it.
I read that you've described the industry fan base as a fiery sort of niche audience. Have they reached out to you? Have you gotten feedback from anyone unsolicited? I'm curious what they say to you about it.
Yeah, I love the fans of this show because they ride so hard for us. But some of the most impactful messages that I've received have been from other people of color, particularly women who are in finance. A lot of them said, I so appreciate that this exists just because now I feel like people know that I exist and that we are fighting in this world. There's a lot of people being like, I love braids on the trade floor, because I guess that doesn't happen that often. But yeah, just an appreciation for the visibility, for the representation, which is great.
And speaking of representation, you have your character Harper has this really interesting dynamic and relationship with her manager, Eric. Can you explain what it is about these two characters that draw them to each other and repel against each other as well?
Yeah, I think Harper and Eric relate to each other in the sense that they feel othered. Both of them feel othered, be it race, class, whatever it is, the way they deal in the trading floor. Eric must see a young version of him, a young, hungry version of him in Harper, and so he chooses to bring her in. And they are both playing in this sort of cruel game that although they have this kinship, they also use each other. They leverage each other against each other to sort of succeed in the game that is the entire trading floor, that is the industry. It's unfortunate because, at least in our show, I don't know about your world, but in our show, you can never know if anyone is like a safe place. Everything can be used for business or otherwise against you or for you. And I think those two really tiptoe that line. There seems to be, I believe there is, a deep love that they have for each other, but it's twisted because it's, you know, in this petri dish of chaos and siloing and leveraging.
Yeah, they really relate to each other in a way, and I like what you said about being othered because Eric is a Chinese-American, also an American expat in London, and of course he sees something about Harper where he wants to sponsor her, he wants to mentor her. He calls her harpsichord. I mean, there's an affinity for each other that you don't see among other characters, which really captures a lot of attention. And also there's this dynamic between generations too, because Harper is Gen Z and Eric is what, Gen X? But this idea that they have different expectations of what you do in a workplace, what's appropriate in a workplace, and how you're supposed to perform in a workplace, your level of commitment. Can you talk a little bit about that? How intentional was that in the show to explore all those different dynamics between, say, a boomer, a Gen Xer, a millennial, a Gen Zer?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's part of the representative aspect of the show is that we're not just showing the people with the most money at the top, with the most power. We're not just showing the people at the bottom. We're showing a little mix of everything in between and how they all interact with each other because they don't exist without each other. But yeah, one of the things that I love about making Conrad as writers in the show in general is that it's not intentionally trying to tell you anything about the finance industry, about these people. It's just kind of like a slice of life. We're not trying to tell you, love these people, hate these people. We just want to show you a dramatized picture of what some of their lives look like. And that includes the youngest, the oldest, the newest, the most experienced. And it's just a, it's a perspective thing. And again, to show that all of them exist on the same floor at the same time under the same set of hierarchical rules.
With incredibly realistic dialogue to boot. How does your immersion into this world affect the way that you look at headlines that come out now on business or markets or finance? For instance, you film in the UK and Wales. The British pound has been plunging, for instance. I mean, when you look at a headline like that, because of your time spent thinking about this industry, does it change the way you look at things?
A little bit, but only in the respect that I'm like, oh, I kind of know what that means, and then I get tickled because because previously I was like, I don't know, that doesn't make, it doesn't matter to me. But in that situation, I'm like, oh, maybe now, well, even now, I'm still like, I don't really know what that means. But now when I go, I'll travel to London and be like, the pound is down, which means my dollars mean what when I go shopping here? That's kind of where my mind is.
It's a good thing for you as an American.
Right.
I also want to ask you a little bit about this idea of whether finance is a meritocracy, because Harper, your character, seems to behave as if she believes it is. She's a rising star on the trading floor, right? She didn't go to Wharton or Stanford. She supposedly went to Binghamton.
Right.
I won't give away any spoilers, but do you think the show tries to portray finance as a meritocracy, or is it telling a different story about how privilege still determines your trajectory?
I think the show is doing exactly what it's supposed to do because you asked that question. It's not necessarily telling you it is a meritocracy or it isn't. It's asking the audience who sees this, is it? It's like asking you guys to ask that question. Me personally, I don't know because I'm not actually in it, but it's an interesting thing that someone like Harper, sort of coming with maybe less privileges than some of her counterparts, desperately believes that it is. I think that's because she thinks that's the only way she could really belong there. And I don't know if that's entirely true, because then there's characters like Yasmin who do come from some more privilege, more money. Her father has connections, and she gets in the bank, and she doesn't have the expertise that Harper has, and yet she's there. So I don't know, but that's what I love about the show, is that it sparks the question.
Debate.
Yeah, and then we get to talk about that.
Yeah.
I would love to talk about that with you guys and see what you think.